Hi, my name is Naomi Shifrin, and for the summer of 2020, I worked at the Global Fund to fight AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria in Geneva, Switzerland. Today, I will be presenting on the efficacy of cash transfers in the fight against HIV/AIDS and tuberculosis. So a little bit about the history of cash transfers. They were first largely adopted on a wide scale in the 1990s as a response to the debt crisis of the 1980s and subsequent proliferation of poverty. In response, Latin American governments adopted conditional cash transfer programs to reduce poverty and incentivize particular behaviors to improve outcomes in health, education, and poverty. With a strong evidence base, conditional cash transfer programs have been adopted across the globe. As of 2016, 130 governments across the globe have an unconditional cash transfer program in place, and 63 nations have adopted at least one conditional cash transfer program. Unconditional cash transfers are financial payments given to the poor with no strings attached, whereas conditional cash transfers are payments contingent upon the recipient's adherence to a particular behavior deemed beneficial. Cash transfers have strong impacts on poverty reduction, on education, on health, and on inequality measures. A quick summary, cash transfers have had strong and generally positive impacts on a variety of outcomes related to poverty and labor participation, health and nutrition behaviors, education, women's empowerment, and inequality, with some notable exceptions. 6 out of 8 studies have found that conditional cash transfers tend to be more effective than unconditional cash transfers, although this varies depending on the intervention. And there's less conclusive evidence available on long-term outcomes. Further investigation here is needed. So today we'll be investigating the impact of cash transfers on HIV/AIDS and tuberculosis. My research questions begin with the impact of cash transfers on HIV health-seeking behaviors, on HIV rates and disease burden, and on the key social determinants of HIV/AIDS, and the same for tuberculosis. My methodology was beginning in 2020 in June. I searched a variety of scholarly web sources, including Google Scholar and Princeton University Library and JSTOR, looking for terms related to CCTs, HIV, TB, UCTs, and cash transfers. I amalgamated and categorized 70 plus articles in a database, categorized study outcomes, and then synthesized my observations. Some limitations of my study, this review is not systematic, so evidence may be missing. My searches were conducted exclusively in English, and then subsequently the review may have potential biases. Beginning with the impact of cash transfers on HIV/AIDS. I've categorized my analysis first by health-seeking behaviors, then by rates, and then by the social determinants of HIV/AIDS. So what we find in evaluation is that cash transfers to reduce risky sexual behaviors are promising. The impacts may be different by gender, however. In addition, greater investigation of the long-term impact of CTs on health behaviors is needed, and the size and frequency of the transfers may have significant impacts on the efficacy of the program. In marriage and family, we find that the timing of the intervention in a child's life may be very significant. Conditional cash transfers may have more impact where unconditional cash transfers do not have impact. The short and long-term impact of cash transfers on early marriage and pregnancy among the very most vulnerable young women and girls is promising, but these returns decrease over time. And in addition, the evidence of the impact of cash transfers on childbearing behaviors is mixed. Furthermore, the long-term impact on all of these interventions is at present uncertain, and sustainability is a continuous question. We find that cash transfers increase the uptake of HIV testing as well as clinical visits, and that cash transfers appear to successfully increase condom usage in the short term, though the sustainability of cash transfers to increase condom usage itself is not promising. Turning to an evaluation of HIV prevalence, we find that there's promising evidence that unconditional cash transfers and conditional cash transfers may enable significant and successful reductions in HIV incidence. This is proven especially true for risk-loving individuals and young girls in school at baseline. Evidence on whether conditional cash transfers on school attendance to reduce HIV incidence is mixed, however. In addition, conditional cash transfers, conditional on outcomes with proven success, may hold promise in reducing HIV prevalence. We lastly turn to an analysis of the social determinants of HIV/AIDS. And we find that there is a strong impact of cash transfers on improving outcomes in schooling, increasing school attendance and enrollment, reducing dropout rates. In addition, the impact of schooling on reducing HIV prevalence itself is promising and proven. Addressing schooling through cash transfers does hold potential for addressing HIV risk behaviors as well, though this evidence is more limited. Cash transfers have also had strong impacts on poverty and on women's empowerment. We thus find that cash transfers, both conditional and unconditional, do hold significant potential for addressing some of the root social determinants of HIV/AIDS. In conclusion, cash transfers are most effective for those with the lowest baselines in low-income countries. The timing, size, frequency, and duration of transfers matters. Interventions on sexual risk-taking are more consistently effective for women and girls rather than for men. Conditionality ought to be evaluated based on the specific program. There's a strong potential to address the key social drivers of HIV/AIDS. Impacts on short-term health behaviors and risk factors are generally strong in the desired direction. However, impacts on long-term outcomes are more uncertain. Some questions to keep in mind for further analysis for the Global Fund are to think about country context and implementation, to think about cost benefit, where would the funding otherwise have gone, to investigate questions around sustainability, and to look into equity. Who is most impacted by HIV/AIDS in the particular region? Does the program address the needs of the most marginalized and at-risk groups? We next turn to an analysis of the impact of cash transfers on tuberculosis. A similar categorization for analysis. We find, ultimately, in terms of tuberculosis health-seeking behaviors, recipients are consistently and significantly less likely to drop out of treatment. They're more likely to get screened for tuberculosis. However, only one study documents this impact. Recipients are also more likely to initiate TB treatment. But the evidence base here is largely observational. Causal inference thus cannot be established. Turning to outcomes, treatment success, cure rates, and mortality rates, as well as incidence rates, we find that recipients have consistently and significantly more successful tuberculosis outcomes. Recipients also have consistently and significantly higher cure rates. Only 4 out of 7 studies found reductions in tuberculosis mortality rates and respond to cash incentives. Results on the impact of cash transfers on TB incidence rates is mixed. And the quality of evidence is generally low. The majority of studies are observational, and we just need more randomized control studies in order to determine the causal impact of cash transfers on tuberculosis outcomes. Lastly, we turn to an evaluation of the impact of cash transfers on the major social determinants of health of tuberculosis. These are poverty and malnutrition and hunger, poor housing and ventilation, crowding and pollution, and barriers to healthcare access. We find that cash transfers, as previously stated, have significant and consistently strong effects at reducing poverty and increasing per capita consumption, including food expenditure, as well as food diversity and food security. While untested as of yet, we do believe that cash transfers hold potential for improving housing conditions through the reduction of poverty. And cash transfers as well have had strong and demonstrably significant impacts on improving the uptake of health interventions and healthcare access. I also believe that well-designed, culturally sensitive cash transfer interventions do hold the potential to fight stigma, overcome geographic barriers, and work within cultural barriers to improve access. In conclusion, the impact of cash transfers on tuberculosis. The impact of cash transfers on TB incidence rates itself is mixed. The impacts of cash transfers on TB mortality rates are also mixed. Cash transfers do, however, have significant and consistent impacts on health-seeking behaviors, as well as on many outcomes. They're also proven to be most effective for the most vulnerable members of the population. The quality of the evidence base is generally low. The cash transfers hold strong potential to address the key social determinants of tuberculosis. Lastly, questions on implementation remain. What next? Looking ahead, my hope is for the Global Fund to investigate their role in employing or not employing cash transfers in the fight against HIV/AIDS, in the fight against tuberculosis, and in the fight against malaria. What does this mean for future and present investment? How and why? Thank you.